Hello, I'm Barry Lee Wendell and I'm in Morgantown, West Virginia. If I had been born in Europe, which I wouldn't have been because my parents would have been killed if they had been born in Europe, my name would be Dov Bear Eliezer Wendlinski. But I was born in Baltimore, Maryland, so it's Barry Lee Wendell. I'm on the board of Hillel in Morgantown and the City Council. The Hillel asked me to read names. Hillel is a Jewish student organization at WVU, and we usually do this at the Mountain Lair, which is the student union at WVU, but it's closed because of the coronavirus epidemic. So I'm going to read some names of people who were murdered by the Nazis. Aaron Kogan, age 31, from the USSR. Died in 1943 in Leningrad, USSR, killed by the Nazis. Moisei Shifrin, age 40, from the USSR, died in Kharkov, Ukraine, 1943, murdered by the Nazis. Reuven Shapsa, from Poland, age 54, murdered by the Nazis in Auschwitz in 1944. Itzhak Shapsa, age 18, from Poland, murdered at Auschwitz by the Nazis in 1944. Riva Shapsa, age 22, from Poland, murdered by the Nazis in Poland in 1942. Kersh Shapsa, age 20, from Poland, murdered by the Nazis in 1942 in Poland. Tzipora Epstein, age 39, murdered by the Nazis in Lodz, Poland, where she was from. I have family members whose name was Epstein and from Poland. She could have been a relative. Fega Shapsa, age 50, from Poland, murdered by the Nazis in Auschwitz, 1942. Manes Perlovich, age 43, from Poland, murdered by the Nazis in Poland in 1942. Itzhak Perlovich, age 47, from Poland, murdered by the Nazis in Lodz, Poland in 1943. Solomon Aronkir, age 29, from Russia, from Stalingrad, Ukraine, murdered by the Nazis in 1942. Vladimir Barer, age 35, from the USSR, murdered by the Nazis in Zaporizhzhia, Ukraine in 1941. Moshe Steinberg, 31, from Poland, murdered in Pinsk, Poland, 1941. Second page. Malka Sapochnikov, age 26, from the USSR, murdered by the Nazis in Gorbachev, Zhytomyr in Ukraine, 1942. Riva Sapochnikov, age 24, USSR, murdered in Berdichov, Zhytomyr, Ukraine, 1942. Rochel Sapochnikov, 20, from the USSR, murdered by the Nazis in Berdichev, Zhytomyr, Ukraine, 1942. Luma Vertlieb, age 45, USSR, from Antonovka, Polyese, Belarus, murdered by the Nazis in 1941. Chaim Vertub, 54, from Russia, died in Anatovka, Polyese, Belarus, 1941, murdered by the Nazis. Avram Steinberg, 22, from Poland, murdered by the Nazis in Pinsk, Poland in 1941. Yakov Vertlib, 28, from the USSR, died in Köln, Rhine province in Germany, 1945, murdered by the Nazis. Nachman Steinberg, age 70, from Poland, murdered by the Nazis in Pinsk, Poland, 1941. Shaya Steinberg, age 35, Pinsk, Poland, murdered by Nazis in 1941. Mikhail Levitt, age 39, from Russia, died in Luga, Leningrad, Russia in 1941, murdered by the Nazis. Lana Steinberg, age 32, from Poland, died in Pinsk in Poland in 1941, murdered by the Nazis. Rosa Galkin, from Russia, died in Odessa, Ukraine, 1941, murdered by the Nazis. Chana Tabachman, 71, from Russia, died in Odessa, Ukraine, 1941, murdered by Nazis. Page 3. Brendel Binner, 43, from Russia, died in Zhytomyr, Ukraine in 1941, murdered by the Nazis. Ida Denker, age 40, from Russia, died in Khmelnyk, Vinnytsia, Ukraine, 1941, murdered by Nazis. Chaya Garfunkel, age 30, from Poland, murdered in Riga, Latvia by the Nazis, 1941. Miriam Davidson, age 30, from Poland, died in Riga, Latvia, 1941, murdered by the Nazis. Polina Schwartz, age 20, from the USSR, died in Alexandria, Ukraine, 1942, murdered by Nazis. Hanna Schwartz, age 45, from Russia, murdered in Alexandria, Ukraine by the Nazis, 1942. Rachmiel Polis, age 40, from Poland, was killed in 1940 in Warsaw, Poland, by the Nazis. Itzhak Polis, age 39, murdered by the Nazis in 1941 in Warsaw, Poland. Jakub Borenstein, age 21, from Poland, died in Archangel, Russia in 1940, murdered by Nazis. Rachmiel Borenstein, 41, from Poland, murdered by Nazis in Warsaw, Poland, 1941. Yosef Brandin, age 40, from Russia, died in Dobrush Gomel, Belarus, in 1941, murdered by the Nazis. Betia Rygorodsky, age 30, from Russia, was murdered by the Nazis in Odessa, in Ukraine, in 1942. Yakov Krugli, age 38, from Russia, murdered by Nazis in Leningrad, in Russia, in 1941. Pesha Krachmer, age 58, from the USSR, died in Batsavichel, Belarus, murdered by Nazis in 1941. Kasha Rubinik, age 47, from the USSR, died in Svislach, Belarus, 1941, murdered by Nazis. Natalie Israel, age 76, from Germany, died in Theresienstadt in Czechoslovakia, murdered by the Nazis in 1945. Clara Goffman, age 30, from the USSR, died in Odessa, Ukraine in 1941, murdered by Nazis. Hirsch Radowicz, age 67, in Poland, died in Treblinka in 1942. Josef Uzvitsky, 33, from the USSR, died in Orel, Russia, 1942, murdered by the Nazis. Yefim Volodarsky, age 36, from the USSR, died in Ukraine, 1941, murdered by Nazis. Leza Reisman, 35, from the USSR, died in Voronezh, Russia, 1942, murdered by Nazis. Esther Gershman, age 33, from Poland, died in Stanislavov, Poland, 1942, murdered by Nazis. David Schechter, age 20, from Poland, died in Stanislavov, Poland, 1942, murdered by Nazis. Fulia Förster, age 42, from Poland, died in 1942 in Stanislavov, Poland, murdered by the Nazis. Fege Schechter, age 53, from Poland, died in Stanislavov, Poland, 1942, murdered by Nazis. Ita Binstock, age 37, from Poland, died in Chełmno, murdered by Nazis in 1942. Bala Binstuk, age 29, from Poland, murdered by the Nazis in Chełmno in 1942. Malka Binstok, her sister, age 27, from Poland, died in Chełmno in 1942. Israel Binstok, brother, age 45, from Poland, was killed in Chełmno by the Nazis in 1942. Morsha Binstok, another brother, age 23, from Poland, died in Chełmno in 1942. Yosif Erkes, age 72, from the USSR, died in Kharkov in Ukraine, 1942, murdered by Nazis. Daniel Giberman, age 30, from the USSR, died somewhere in Russia in 1941, murdered by Nazis. Ida Rubin, age 19, from the USSR, died in Moscow, Russia, 1942, murdered by Nazis. Izia Grachovsky, age 18, from the USSR, died in Kirovgrad, Ukraine, in 1942, murdered by Nazis. Yakov Orachovsky, 27, the brother of Izia, from the USSR, died in Kirovograd, Ukraine, 1941, murdered by Nazis. Shaya Orachovsky, age 57, from the USSR, was killed in Kirovograd, Ukraine, 1942, by the Nazis. Fania Levin, age 30, from Russia, was killed in Minsk, Belarus, in 1941. Ernst Bessinger, from Germany, age 61, died in Buchenwald in Germany, murdered by the Nazis in 1943. And Beryl Ginsburg, age 33, from the USSR, died in Zlobin, Belarus, 1941, murdered by the Nazis. Let me take a second to say a little more. I just want to say one thing. I had thought that my Polish family had escaped from Poland. They mostly came early in the 20th century because I had a genealogy chart that showed 6 brothers and sisters in the Wendlinski family who became Wendell after World War II. But I went to a genealogy convention where I found out that there were not 6 children in that family, but 13 children. 7 of them did not leave Poland, and I presume they were all killed because I don't know anybody from there. And I met someone here who had gone on Ancestry and found that they had relatives in Europe, and they went back and had a big family reunion. And I didn't say anything, but I felt really sad and upset about it because I don't have family in Europe that I can visit because they were all murdered by the Nazis. Thank you very much.